Okay, so with this, we are going to be talking about modeling fraction division. Now, some of you may already have some background with dividing fractions, and that's okay. But as you know, we do a lot with the modeling to make sure we understand what does this problem really look like. So we are going to go with this example of 4 divided by 2/3. But let's make sure we understand the parts of this division problem. Now, I hope everybody understands that the 4 in this case is a whole. It's a whole number. And here we have our fraction, or our part of a whole. Now, in our fraction, we know that we have a numerator and we have a denominator. Can anybody tell me what the numerator tells us? Cameron?
How many parts you have?
Yeah, how many parts there are. Exactly. How many parts there are, or how many parts you have. And what does the denominator tell us? Caitlin?
How much you started out with, like, you know?
Yeah, basically telling us what the whole is, right? So in this case, it tells us the number of parts to make a whole. So that comes from basically our review of the whole and that fraction piece that we talked about last week. But we also have a division problem here. Does anybody know the different parts of a division problem and what they're called? Kavehi?
I know how to do one, but like the name.
Do you know what the first number is called in a division problem? Anyone remember? Caitlin?
That's what like the thing that you're dividing up.
It is the part that we're going to be dividing up, and it's what we call the dividend. Does anybody know what we call the second number? Brayden? The divisor. Exactly. So lots of things going on in this problem that we can see. And if we understand those things, it's going to help us kind of really understand what our problem is asking us and also what our answer could look like also. Now, I've given you a hint here. It has a little asterisk, and it's in a box that says, think of this as. So we're going to look at this problem as how many groups of 2/3 can we make from 4? So that's kind of what that question is asking. How many groups of 2/3 can we make from 4? And a lot of you in your group posters that you did last week really understood that division and dividing something up is making those equal groups. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so we're going to look at step 1. We're going to break this down into steps. Now, this isn't normally how we would do a problem, but to just make it a little clearer of what we actually do step by step, we've broken it down into actual 4 steps. So step 1 tells us, model the dividend, the amount we are dividing up. So what is our dividend in this problem? What is it? 4, right? So in this case, we have 4, and that's our whole number. So right now, I'm going to take this tape diagram, and I'm going to put it into 4 groups. So what would each group be if the whole diagram represents 4? What would this box right here represent? Caitlin?
4.
Well, the whole thing equals 4.
Oh,
So what would one box equal?
1.
1 whole. Would you agree? So right there, we have to understand that each of these boxes represent 1 whole. And altogether, they're equaling our 4 whole. So that's what we need to understand. Step 1 has to do with that dividend piece, the number that we're going to be breaking up or dividing up. Now, step 2 tells us to identify the part or group size, and I've told you that this is the denominator of the fraction. So in this example, what was the denominator of our fraction? Brandon? Yeah, we have 3 here. So what it's telling us is, in this example, the 1 whole, and remember we have 4 of those 1 wholes, we're going to divide it into 3 equal parts. Now keep in mind, this is only the 1 whole that we're going to be doing at a time. We're going to focus on 1 whole. So on my model here, I'm going to model my 4 whole again, where I know each of those parts represent 1 whole. So again, here's 1 whole, 1 whole, 1 whole, and 1 whole. And it's telling me that I need to divide each whole number into equal parts. And we just said that we're going to do it into 3 equal parts. So here's 1 whole. To make 3 equal parts, you agree? I'm going to make sure I have 3 little boxes in there. I'm going to do the same thing for this whole. I'm going to break it into 3 equal boxes, equal parts. Same thing for this whole, and same thing for this whole. So we can see each of our wholes are now divided into thirds. So step 1, we are only focusing with our whole, our dividend. Step 3, here's step 2 and 3, we now decided that we need to actually take each of the wholes and break them into, because we're dividing by a fraction with thirds. Now again, I'm going to rewrite down everything that I had before, because this is my next step. I know I broke them down in each of them into thirds, each of my wholes. And now I'm actually going to label each of them 1/3. Okay, now step 4 tells me I'm now going to circle groups. And if I go back to my individual problem, what needs to be in each of my groups?
3.
Careful. What does this fraction actually mean? 2/3. So I'm going to actually now, I'm going to circle groups of 2/3. Because remember our question at the beginning was, how many groups of 2/3 can we make from 4? Well, I'm now going to circle them. Here's a group of 2/3. Here's a group of 2/3. Go ahead and continue that until you come up with your total number of groups. And does yours mine match up with mine up here? Okay, so we can see how many groups of 2/3 do we have?
6.
So we can say we can make 6 groups of 2/3 from 4. So when we go back to our original problem of 4 divided by 2/3, we can see that we get an answer of 6. we were able to make 6 groups. And hopefully with that modeling, it really lays it out where you can see that. Okay, any questions on any of those steps? Now, some of you might be saying, well, do I have to keep drawing that tape diagram all those times? And no, just for our notes here, we just broke it down into those different steps. So I do want to give you another problem, but if you're like mine, we're done with this flap, so what do we need to do? We're going to flip it up. Okay? And we're going to take a look at another problem, so another example. And for this example, we're going to look at 2 divided by 1/4. So just like what we talked about in the previous problem, this one is actually telling us how many groups of 1/4 are in 2. So that's what we're trying to figure out. How many of those groups can we make that are 1/4 can we get from 2 whole? So to keep it simple, I know there's different kinds of modeling that we can do. You've done circles, you've done rectangles, you've done squares. We're going to stick with our tape diagram. So right now I'm going to draw a tape diagram. And I know that this tape diagram represents 2 whole. And I'm showing that it's 2 whole by I have 2 equal parts here that I made. So each of these parts here equal 1. Now, just like the last problem, I need to identify the part or the group size. So I look at my fraction, and it's telling me what group size do I need to do? 4. So I'm going to take each whole, and I'm going to break them down into 4s. And I'm going to do the same thing with my other whole. Break it down into 4s. Now on this one, circle any groups. Would you agree? Because it's not asking me how many groups of 2/4 I can make or how many groups of 3/4. It just says how many groups of 1/4. Well, they're already contained within their own little box here. And how many do we have? 8. So we can actually see that 2 divided by 1/4 gives us 8 groups. We can make 8 groups of those. Okay, so whether you do it all contained like this or you want to break it down step by step like we did with our first example, that is what we're going to be working on today.